Sarah Chen stood in the sterile hospital corridor, her mother's phone clutched in her trembling hands. The doctor's words still echoed in her ears. Time of death, 3:47 a.m. It had been 6 hours since her mother's heart monitor flatlined. 6 hours since the cancer finally won. The phone felt heavier than it should, like it carried the weight of all the conversations they'd never have again. Sarah's thumb hovered over the voicemail icon. One unheard message. She'd seen it light up just moments after the nurses pulled the sheet over her mother's face. But she hadn't been ready to hear her mother's voice again. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The hallway was empty, except for the occasional nurse padding by in soft-soled shoes. Sarah found a quiet alcove near a window overlooking the parking lot, where dawn was just beginning to paint the sky a sickly yellow. She took a deep breath and pressed play. But instead of her mother's warm, familiar voice, she heard only static. Then, a timestamp that made her blood freeze. Message received Tuesday, October 15th, 9:23 p.m. Today was Saturday, October 12th. The message was dated 3 days in the future. Sarah's first instinct was to check her own phone's date and time. Both devices showed the same thing. Saturday, October 12th, 9:52 a.m. She replayed the beginning of the message, certain she'd misheard. But no, the automated voice was clear. Tuesday, October 15th. The static grew louder, and then, like a radio tuning into a distant station, a voice emerged. It was her mother's voice, but different, thin, strained, as if speaking required enormous effort. "Sarah, my sweet girl, I don't have much time." Sarah's knees buckled. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the cold linoleum floor. Her mother's voice continued, each word punctuated by labored breathing. "I know you're confused. I know this doesn't make sense. But you need to listen carefully. On Tuesday night, you cannot go home. Do you understand? Whatever you do, whatever happens, do not go to your apartment on Tuesday night." The message crackled, and for a moment Sarah thought it had cut off. Then her mother's voice returned, urgent now. The impossible timestamp burned in her mind as she listened to words that shouldn't exist. "There's something in the walls, something that's been waiting. It knew I was protecting you, but now I'm..." A wet, rattling cough interrupted her words. "Now I'm gone, and it's free. It's been feeding on our family for generations, Sarah, waiting for the guardian to die." Sarah's hands shook so violently, she almost dropped the phone. This had to be some kind of mistake, a glitch in the voicemail system. Her mother had been delirious in her final days, pumped full of morphine. This was just a hallucination, a dying woman's confused ramblings that had somehow been misstated. "Your grandmother knew," her mother's voice continued. "That's why she made us move every few years when you were young, always staying ahead of it. But I got tired, Sarah. I got sick, and I thought maybe it had given up. I was wrong." Another pause, filled with that horrible static. When her mother spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "The mirrors, Sarah. Cover all the mirrors in your apartment before sunset on Tuesday. Use the black cloth from my closet, the one in the cedar chest. And whatever you see, whatever you hear, do not look at your reflection after dark. It uses the mirrors too." The message cut off abruptly. Sarah frantically pressed replay, but now there was nothing. No message, no timestamp. The voicemail inbox showed empty, as if the message had never existed. She sat there for a long moment, staring at the phone's blank screen. Grief did strange things to people, she told herself. She was exhausted, emotionally drained. She'd probably dozed off and dreamed the whole thing, but when she stood up, her legs were numb from sitting on the cold floor, and the timestamp, Tuesday, October 15th, 9:23 p.m., was seared into her memory with crystal clarity. Sarah spent the weekend in a haze, making funeral arrangements and accepting condolences from relatives she barely knew. She tried to forget about the voicemail, to chalk it up to exhaustion and grief, but the words echoed in her mind. Something in the walls, waiting, feeding on her family for generations. Tuesday morning dawned gray and oppressive. Sarah went to work, trying to maintain normalcy, but as the day wore on, a sense of dread settled over her like a shroud. Her coworkers commented that she looked pale, suggested she take more time off. She should have listened. By 5 o'clock, she couldn't stand it anymore. She left work early and drove to her apartment, the black cloth folded in her bag. The rational part of her mind screamed that this was absurd, that she was letting grief drive her to paranoia. But her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Whatever you do, do not go to your apartment on Tuesday night." She stood outside her building, keys in hand, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. She could leave, check into a hotel, come back tomorrow when this madness had passed. But something pulled her forward: curiosity, skepticism, or perhaps the very thing her mother had warned her about. Sarah entered her apartment as the last rays of sunlight painted the walls orange. Everything looked normal. Her cat, Machi, rubbed against her legs, purring. The familiar scent of lavender potpourri filled the air. She almost laughed at herself. Then she noticed the mirrors. She'd never realized how many there were. The full-length mirror in the bedroom, the medicine cabinet in the bathroom, the decorative mirror in the hallway, the antique hand mirror on her dresser, even the microwave door and the dark television screen threw back her reflection. As the apartment grew darker, each reflective surface seemed to watch her. Sarah pulled out the black cloth, but there wasn't nearly enough to cover everything. She started with the bedroom mirror, draping the cloth over it and securing the edges with tape. The moment the mirror was covered, the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. She used bath towels for the bathroom mirror, a bedsheet for the hallway. The TV she unplugged and turned to face the wall. But there were still so many surfaces: picture frames, windows, the glossy finish of her laptop. As darkness fell outside, every reflection seemed to multiply, each one showing her face from a slightly different angle. It was 8:47 p.m. when she heard the first sound from inside the walls. A soft scratching, like fingernails on wood. Machi hissed and ran under the bed. Sarah told herself it was mice, or the upstairs neighbors, or the old building settling, but the scratching grew louder, more insistent, and it seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. At 9:15, the lights began to flicker. At 9:20, the scratching stopped. At 9:22, Sarah made the mistake of glancing at her phone's black screen. The reflection that stared back wasn't quite her own. It was her face, but older, gaunter, with hollow eyes that reflected an intelligence that wasn't human. The mouth in the reflection smiled, even though Sarah's own lips were pressed together in terror. At exactly 9:23 p.m., her phone rang. The caller ID showed her mother's number. Sarah's hand trembled as she answered. For a moment, there was only breathing, wet, labored breathing that sounded nothing like her mother's. Then a voice, her own voice, but speaking words she wasn't saying. "Hello, Sarah. I've been waiting so long to finally meet you face to face." The reflection in the phone screen began to move independent of her own movements, pressing its palms against the inside of the screen, as if trying to push through. The covered mirrors throughout the apartment began to bulge outward, the fabric straining against something underneath. Sarah dropped the phone and ran for the door, but the hallway stretched impossibly long before her. Behind her, glass shattered as something burst through the covered mirrors. She could hear it, them moving through her apartment, speaking in voices that were almost but not quite her own, her mother's, her grandmother's. The walls themselves seemed to ripple and breathe, as if the entire building had become a living thing. The scratching returned, but now it was accompanied by whispers in languages that predated human speech. "We've been waiting," they chorused, "waiting for the guardian to fail, waiting to complete the family." Sarah reached the door and yanked it open, only to find herself facing another mirror, the building's security door, its glass surface reflecting not the hallway beyond, but an endless recursion of her own terrified face, each reflection slightly wrong, each one reaching toward her with hands that weren't quite human. She stumbled backward into her apartment. The things that had emerged from the mirrors were everywhere now, wearing the faces of her family like ill-fitting masks. They moved with jerky, unnatural motions, as if they were still learning how to operate in 3 dimensions. "Your mother was clever," one of them said with her grandmother's voice. "Always moving, always running. But we are patient. We have been feeding on your bloodline for so long, Sarah. Each generation, we grow stronger. Each death, we claim another face." Sarah backed into her bedroom, searching desperately for any surface that wasn't reflective. But even the walls seemed to shimmer now, showing distorted versions of herself from angles that shouldn't exist. "Why?" she gasped. "What do you want?" The thing wearing her mother's face tilted its head at an impossible angle. To complete the collection, your family has such beautiful faces, Sarah. We've been wearing them for centuries, but there was always one who knew, one who kept the others safe. Now the guardian is gone, and you came home despite the warning. It smiled with her mother's lips, but too wide, showing too many teeth. Did you really think that message was a warning? Oh, sweet girl, it was an invitation. Your mother's final gift to us, using your love, your trust, to bring you here. The guardian's last betrayal is always the sweetest. The creatures circled closer, their borrowed faces shifting and blurring at the edges. Sarah could see through them now, see the vast, dark spaces they inhabited behind every reflection, the infinite corridors of mirror worlds, where they collected their stolen faces like trophies. It won't hurt, the grandmother thing whispered. You'll still exist in a way, part of our collection, part of our family, forever and ever and ever. They reached for her with too many hands, and Sarah closed her eyes, unable to bear seeing her own face replicated infinitely in their hungry gazes. She felt their cold fingers touch her skin, and then, suddenly, warmth. Sunlight flooded through the bedroom window. The creatures shrieked and retreated, their forms dissolving like smoke. Sarah opened her eyes to find herself on the floor, Machi purring against her chest. Morning had come. The apartment was in shambles. Every mirror was shattered, leaving glittering fragments across the floor. The black cloth lay in torn pieces. On her phone, the timestamp read Wednesday, October 16th, 6:47 a.m. She had survived the night, but how? The last thing she remembered was her phone buzzed. A new voicemail. With trembling fingers, she played it. Her mother's voice, warm and alive and impossible. Sarah, I know you're scared. I know they came for you. But you're stronger than they are. You always were. That's why I chose you. A pause, then. Check the bottom of the cedar chest. Under the false bottom, there's something I left for you. Something your grandmother left for me. The real protection. The black cloth was just to slow them down, to buy you time. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner. I'm sorry for so many things, but you're the guardian now, Sarah. And you need to prepare. They'll come again. They always do. But now you know they're there, waiting behind every reflection. Now you can fight back. The message ended. This time, the timestamp was correct. Wednesday, October 16th, 6:48 a.m. Just 1 minute after she'd awakened. Sarah understood now. The test was over, but the war had just begun. In the days that followed, she would find what her mother had hidden: ancient knowledge, terrible rituals, and the truth about her family's eternal vigil. She would learn to fight the collectors of faces, to seal the passages between worlds. But she would never again look at any reflection without wondering what watched from the other side.